Okay, so now we are inviting our next presenter, Rodger Griffin. Rodger Griffin is originally from the United States. He currently lives in Southern California. He has a BA in International Studies and MS in Global Studies and International Relations. Now he is a student in the MA teaching English as a second language program at California State University. Rodger has spent over 8 years as an English teacher in South Korea, Japan, and Central America. Now, Rodger, the floor is yours. We are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me try to screen share. There we go.
Yes, I made you co-host, so
Okay.
yeah, I hope. Great. Thank you. Yeah.
I always have to make the adjustment because I go back and forth between a Mac and a PC. And so
No, it's okay. I think it's okay.
Well, first, I just want to thank you all for inviting me here. It's an honor to join you. Just always a pleasure, any opportunity to have a dialogue and learn from just incredible teachers like Dr. Seferolu, who at the beginning questioned whether she was a good teacher. I can assure you that she is. I know that most of us are in agreement with that. I will share just a little bit about my experience of studying with Dr. Seferolu here in the United States. I think she touched on, sort of that how to dance with others, and I'm going to tailor this to that concept because I think it's so brilliant. I know when she's working with us here, the students from the United States, there's a lot of individuals that come from various cultural backgrounds. And she's always been excellent with helping us navigate, our own identities as teachers, but also the complexities that are sort of intertwined with teaching English as a second language across various contexts. And so I'm just always so thankful for that. And I just want to thank you all again for inviting me. My area of expertise is really in academic freedom and global student mobility. I've spent time as an English language instructor in various contexts. Right now, in addition to doing this program or completing this program, I'm also a Ph.D. student in international relations at Salve Salve University in Rhode Island, which is on the East Coast of the United States. So I'm sort of multitasking to say a bit. But I chose this topic because I think it's relevant. A lot of the information, a lot of the literature in the field talks about the need for English language teachers to really inform themselves about not just the cultural context, but a little bit about politics and international relations. And so in recent decades, China has been an emerging country. It's one of the biggest engines in terms of economic growth in the world. It is the largest sender of international students. And a lot of higher education has been more and more focused on China and providing services to students originating outward as well as inward into China. And so I think it's important. This is one of the key areas for us to focus on in terms of navigating these challenges. Especially as they center around academic freedom. And what I'm going to do today is attempt to tie this to English language teaching. And so we touched on who I am. I want to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to discuss today. So one, I'm going to give a definition of academic freedom. Depending on your context, this definition varies widely across the scopes, right? So in the United States, there's more of a liberal sort of definition of it. And then that definition has a key variance when we go outward towards the east. I am going to try to condense more than 70 years of history in about 10 minutes. And so this is going to be very condensed. I think that I can touch on the key components sufficient enough to give us insight into how this interacts or correlates to English teaching in a global context. So a couple of things that I mentioned why this matters. Well, it impacts academic freedom challenges in China. It affects research environments. It, also, regardless of where you're at or where you live, where you decide to teach, you're likely to be impacted by this. I'm going to touch on that a little bit in the presentation. Some of the areas where I will discuss are self-censorship, the interconnectedness of all this, as well as academic freedom and its associated freedoms that go closely with it, how it impacts transparency, human rights, and what that has to do with some of the key objectives that have been set by organizations like the British Council, as well as TESOL and other international teaching English organizations. So the first thing that I think is really important for us to do is really establish what academic freedom is. Sometimes in the United States, you see people argue that academic freedom is literally everything, right? That's not actually what it is. People use that as a defense for different things, but a very basic definition is that it's the freedom to teach and learn, right, without suppression or coercion. It's the freedom to conduct research on sometimes sensitive topics, and that's for professors and students. But it's also the ability to have a voice or opinions. And I've put an asterisk around this because some of the more liberal definitions kind of go all the way out and say, without really any interference. But other definitions say, well, there's some caveats to that in terms of academic freedom, even in the most liberal sense, can be limited depending on your position. For instance, if you're a professor at an institution, you have some constraints into what you can say publicly across different areas. Those constraints don't always manifest in rules or regulations, but they're sort of these unspoken things. Well, this definition differs to what some scholars have said is a key caveat for the Eastern sort of, Asia, over in Asia, specifically China, right? So academic freedom in China, scholars have argued, has a key area of social responsibility, right? To consider how your research or how things that you do or say in a classroom can have social ramifications or impact the harmony of society, right? And so those are important distinctions for us to be aware of, because depending on your perspective on that gives you a completely different view of those challenges. Why this matters to English language teaching is, well, academic freedom is really important for us to be able to discuss or pursue complicated issues or societal problems. And in recent decades, teaching English has incorporated the need to make sure that we're being equitable for our students, right? Making sure that we're considering their identity, their cultural relevant information and important aspects, right? But also that we're honoring who they are, where they come from, and lifting that to the same level, to the same standard of who has the hierarchical power, right? Which tends to, in the past, has tended to permeate from areas like United States or UK. And so if academic freedom is limited in certain areas, then that in a sense stifles that conversation, right? It stifles that ability to tackle things like diversity or social justice or equity, especially as it relates to English language teaching. And so what I want to touch on right here is the brief, very brief overview of these challenges as they manifest within China, and then discuss how that protrudes out and how it affects us regardless of where we're teaching or where we live and work. And so to go back, I'm going to start during the Cultural Revolution, right, which is in 1940s, the late 1940s. And so this period here I've lumped together 1947 to 1997. Well, so in China, this era really consisted of a time of social upheaval, right? It was really challenging. The higher education system shut down for a period of 10 years. Or not quite 10 years, but 1966 to 1970, the higher education system shut down. And there was still a lot of limitations going up to 76. And so this really impacted or shaped the higher education system that we see in China all the way through present day. This period was, you can view it as an area where academic freedom sort of existed in the stick and carrot system, right? So if professors or students sort of went against the grain, you know, they would get the stick, right? There was a punishment. If they were seen as favorable to the government, then it was more of a carrot, right? The reward system. And so this was a very challenging time for academic freedom in general, really tight restrictions within the country. And, you know, it's important to note here that at this time, China is still the largest education system in the world, and that still persists to today. So that just adds to the relevance of it. 1998 to 2000, there's a key law that came into place, which is the higher education law. And there's a couple articles that I think are within that law, which are very specific and important for us to consider, and the points that have been contentious for both sides of the scholarship, right? So Article 41, it states that, you know, essentially the president of the university, they have complete autonomy. They have control over the teaching and the research that's done, right? And so many opponents of this, they say, you know, this is a way for academic freedom to be restricted, right? And then Article 53 is important too, because it essentially aligns the curriculum, right? So this is control over the curriculum. In this sense, scholars have argued on the other side, have argued that again, this is another element of stifling curriculum, controlling the flow of ideas. And so there's been this back and forth as we look at the situation in China with academic freedom. In 2003 to 2013, a lot of the same challenges still persisted. You had more and more self-censorship, right? So there wasn't as much sort of top-down suppression, but there was more self-censorship, right? So individuals sort of selecting what type of research they presented or how they navigated contentious issues in the classroom, right? One of the things that this was evident by is government surveillance, you know, dismissal from positions, limited funding to research areas, things of that nature, right? So there's a lot of focus in providing funding for areas that are more technological in the sense, or not as contentious, right? So less funding to the social sciences and humanities, more to business and engineering, and severely limiting areas of social sciences. In 2013 to 2017, I've broken this off because it started to, there's a differentiation, it started to change. So in this time, some have argued that there's been more openness, right? Other scholars have said, well, there's been more openness, but it's limited, right? So again, restricting, these scholars argue that there's a restriction in the openness in social science and humanities, and but a lot more opening in those other areas where they're not directly sort of at odds with government policies and things of that nature. This area, this time frame is also important because we've started to see a lot more international institutions, right? So that's institutions from different parts of the world going into China to set up, you know, satellite campuses, right? Just because again, as I mentioned, the largest education system in the world. People want to tap into that resource, right? To those large amounts of students, and so those same restrictions have been argued to sort of filter down and impact those institutions that originate outside of China, right? So then that starts to sort of filtrate into those areas, right? Impact academic freedom. Though a lot of those satellite schools, they provide options for English language learning and teaching, and so this also impacts them, right? And so this time frame is really a mix of, it's a mix of openness in some areas and increased suppression in other areas. Well, there's been this debate that's been going on in academic freedom, whether or not it is increasing or decreasing certain aspects. I think one of the best areas to really look at is Hong Kong. Hong Kong, from the time that it was handed over from British rule in the 1990s to about 2006, there was not a lot of sort of um, um, sort of a lot of back and forth between mainland China and Hong Kong, right? Mainland kind of just let Hong Kong be as it was, but then starting in 2006, you started to see uh, more of a sort of overarching approach to how things were done, right? To bring Hong Kong more in line with how things are in mainland China. And so you see this in the national curriculum, and this has led to things where you've seen like with the umbrella movement in recent years, right? Where students have student-led movements along with coalition parties have sort of created these uprisings and said, you know, things are changing and we're opposed to these changes because they limit our ability to learn and conduct research and to discuss topics that we think are important or that we've always discussed in the past, right? It places those limitations. And we, you know, so we've seen in recent years, there's been the new security law that was just enacted. And that's created a lot of upheaval, right? So a lot of people have said, well, it creates areas where it's arbitrary in its interpretations and its enforcement, right? And we've seen that with some students who have gotten in trouble online through social media, or also severely restricting um, outside publications and things of that nature. And so this has sort of been this big conversation in recent years. And why this matters to English language teaching is because as a teacher, when you go in, you have to, as Dr. Seferill mentioned, you have to be able to learn how to dance with others, right? And so this is important to understand the ramifications and the impacts of these specific challenges that begin in China but expand outside, right? And they expand because I give you a few examples. In Australia, a third of the international students are from China, right? Similar numbers in Canada, UK, United States. The majority of international students are from China as well. You know, and so the different contexts, right? So this starts to expand, and if students are experience censorship or academic freedom challenges in primary school, secondary school, this persists all the way up and outward. And so this is important for us to consider as English language teachers, because when we're trying to incorporate things like authentic learning, we need to understand those challenges that students are navigating themselves within their own country, and even when they go outside, right, to another country. Maybe they're studying Turkey or they're studying in Poland. Regardless of the environment, students may choose to self-censor, and this is what some of the scholarship has argued, right? And so, as a teacher, if we're trying to really focus on social affective skills, right, where we're trying to create a stress-free environment or limit stress. I don't know if you can ever create a stress-free environment, but to limit stress, those are things that we have to navigate, right? So that's going to mean that as we're selecting topics, you know, so maybe we're teaching a subject on government or something of that nature, it's going to take quite a bit of skill set and knowledge, or as was mentioned earlier, street smarts, right? How to navigate that, how to not directly challenge students or cultural backgrounds, but to bring people in rather than pushing people out. And I think Barack mentioned earlier, you know, so this likability, I think this is important too in this context, because as a teacher, the way to get to students is, or to way to really be effective, I think, in my opinion, is students need to first like you, right? They need to want to learn with you, engage with you, and have this experience. And if you don't understand how to navigate these cultural nuances or these challenges, that can create a situation where it creates a sort of us versus you, right? And so it needs to be, you need to work on creating this harmonious environment so that people feel safe, they feel like they feel like you understand the challenges that they're facing, and you are sort of an expert in helping to navigate that, right? And so in that sense, it impacts learning environments. But also it creates issues around the focus, which I mentioned earlier, like British Council, TESOL International, around social justice, diversity, and equity. So in China, officially, the government recognizes 56 ethnicities, Han being the majority. well, there are some students that fall outside of that. Other scholars have said, well, there's actually closer to, there's actually several hundred different types of ethnic groups in China, right? And so if you're working with students who come maybe from one of these unrecognized ethnic groups, then that's another component too to consider, to be aware of as you navigate that. And so there's a lot of little pieces to it that I think are important. And so what I wanted to touch on today is just kind of, and I know this was a very brief overview, to touch on some of these very specific issues around academic freedom, but also to highlight the value in understanding them as a teacher, so that we can navigate this, so that we can help our students depending on the context, but also understand how these challenges from within global powers sort of protrude outward and can affect learning environments across the globe. And that was my last slide.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. Okay, I think we can open discussion now. Do we have any questions? Okay, I cannot see yet. There are many comments about your presentation, so you can read them. They are very positive. Okay, so maybe I will start with my question. We live now in a totally new world, unexpectedly. My question is, can you tell us how do you think will the new reality after pandemic reality look like in terms of academic freedom? Do you think there will be a new, a totally new dimension of academic freedom after one day, hopefully, pandemic finishes?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think you're right. So we're living in an environment where things are constantly changing. We're reconsidering how classrooms are structured, how we approach things. I think that one thing that will come out of this pandemic is that challenges, in particular academic freedom, will come more to the forefront, right? So academic freedom is one of these challenges in a global context that sort of it's talked about, but it's not always front and center, right? And it's really important because it covers so many different things in terms of its associated freedoms. And so I think as we start to engage more and more on this global platform, right? So we were already experiencing globalization, internationalization on an increasing level. Having the sense where we can even come together, like this right now is a prime example. We have people in Mexico, Poland, Turkey, United States, different areas, right? We don't all have to be in the same place or even at the same time, literal time. We can still interact, right? And so I think that this is going to be more and more discussion. And to be clear, I don't think that, the issues that are within China I don't see it as, I guess I'll frame it in this way. In the United States, there's the tendency to kind of look at other countries and say, this is how it is in my country. We should do it this way, right? And as a student in grade school, I can remember that. I always tell my friends when I go out the country, U.S. students are indoctrinated, right? Just like in other places, you're indoctrinated to say this is this, right? This same challenge here, right, that we're talking about with academic freedom in China, on a global context, it spills out. The same parallel exists with the United States in guns, right? So give you an example, we have some students from Mexico. Our gun laws were, for us, we've not done anything about it. We simply said the solution to a gun problem is bulletproof backpacks, right? So instead of actually addressing it, right, this spills over to other countries. So like many of our students from Mexico are probably familiar with the challenges that are presented that originate in the United States and spill out, right? So I think types of conversations are going to become more and more frequent, and that it'll be framed in a global context and a better understanding of how we all go about addressing it. Whether or not academic freedom will be more restricted, I think it all depends on the context. So there's certain things that I think will continue to face these challenges around certain topics, but I always believe that it depends on where you're at, what the specific topic is, and how that is viewed within that context, right? So I think as you come closer to the spear, the source, where it is that root of the challenge, I think it is going to continue to be more restricted, at least for the time being. And then as you go more outward, that sort of lessens.
Thank you very much. And I can see that there are also questions on our chat. For example, from Erica, what's your opinion about the IB program in terms of freedom?
Can you expand on IB?
Erica, could you maybe explain it on the chat? Or maybe if you could, you can.
International Baccalaureate, is that what?
Let's wait, there's a new message. No.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think in this sense, so in terms of freedom, again, I think this depends on where the curriculum is originating, right? So, well, not necessarily originating, but where it is being taught. So I think what we'll see more of, and I think this kind of goes to your question, back to your question as well, is that I can see the IB program in places where there's less academic freedom restrictions being substantially different compared to if I'm in an area where there are more restrictions based on certain subjects. And I think it's always going to depend on where you're at, how those subjects get filtered out or navigated or sort of adjusted, manipulated. I think that's always manipulated, not in a negative sense, but manipulated in the sense of fine tuning something to make sure that it is culturally appropriate or adjusted for what's acceptable. Now, it's not to pass judgment, it's to say that the context is likely to change those things. So I think it will continue to be a challenge.
Thank you. And there's one more question from Burak. Do you think China's transition to partial market capitalism, particularly with her joining in World Trade Organization, make any contributions to academic freedom?
Well, I think to really understand the root of the problem, and this is, so condensing this is a bit of a challenge, but to get to the root of the challenge, I think China being more active in the global sphere, I think is, for the most part, I think there's a lot of good. There's a lot of positivity there. I know that a lot of people kind of look at things and say, oh, China's doing this or that. It's the same with the United States. But also it's a way to sort of challenge the hegemony that's existed, right? Where, places like the United States have really had a lot of control over in UK to extent as well, a lot of control over sort of how English language teaching and learning has developed, right? And so when you add another global power, especially a rising power like China to this equation, I think there's a lot of positivity to sort of make it more multilateral, right? So there's more of a balance. I think if we're talking about the economic standpoint, I think that may have some impact to the extent. I think it really depends on the area or the context that we're talking about. I'll give you a quick example, and I'll try to be brief. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was one of those ways that some of the scholars have talked about this as being a way for countries like the United States to say, China is going to continue to grow and have more influence, and we can't match that. But what we can try to do is control the economic sort of rules and regulations on a global scale. even though Donald Trump came in and sort of did away with that. I don't think you really can read a whole lot into Donald Trump's policies because they're sort of, lack of a better phrase, they're out there. They're not really like targeted or focused, right, with the general trends of the direction the United States was trying to go with some of these things. So that's not a direct answer, but I just think it's like one of those things, like with academic freedom, it depends on the context and the specific topics that we'll discuss with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again. I think your topic is really crucial, and thank you that you are here with us and share your the results of your research. If you have any questions to Rodger stays with us, and now I guess we can ask for introduction of our next presenter. So